Hey everyone, JoAnna Battin from Xgility. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Microsoft Teams Essentials, Co-authoring and File Management for True Collaboration. My name is JoAnna Battin and I'm the Director of Strategy and Advisory Services. And really, I've been focused in Microsoft products for at least 20 years now. SharePoint and all of the capabilities of on-prem SharePoint and then SharePoint Online. And most recently in the last 3 years, really moving into the Office 365 strategy environment and really helping our customers to focus and get the most out of Office 365 and all the tools that are now part of the ecosystem. And if we talk about them and deploying them completely together, there is a strategy and there must be a strategy around that, because you can turn the tools on, but adoption is the key, and having a plan and a path to get into Office 365 and adoption of the tools and the features is more critical today than ever. So we're going to cover collaboratively co-authoring and editing files. We're going to talk and learn about how to work with documents and files so you can be productive while you're collaborating. We're going to talk about how do I manage documents and files within Teams, and how do I co-author and edit in real time. And really, when we're talking about that, we're talking about the difference between really working together on a document, not necessarily talking to each other. We're going to cover how to have a meeting and co-author together while you're actually having a call. We're going to talk about how to share your screen and collaborate and work with others, and really all of the different ways that you're able to collaborate, not just using co-authoring, but collaborate on documents, collaborate on resources that are available to you within the Teams environment with your team to make you the most productive. So real quickly, in the last webinar, if you joined us for that, if you haven't joined us for that one, or if you haven't seen that one, go ahead and take a look at it after this. Some of this might make a little more sense to you, but I really just needed to circle back and talk about the subjects that we talked about there. And the first one was teams versus channels. When do I create a team versus when do I create a channel? And we went into some details around that. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a step deeper into Teams itself, because the next thing that I usually see, or that we usually see our customers doing, is putting things in the general channel and then putting a folder structure underneath there. And we're going to talk about why that doesn't necessarily work if you're going to be collaborating, where the limitations might be, and how that happens. So really, when to use folder structure. I know that's an urge. Best practice probably is not to do it that way, and Microsoft really recommends against it. But when and why should you use channels instead of folders? And with that, we're going to get right to the demo. All right, so I'm actually joined by my colleague, Bo Butcher. So I'm showing you Teams. Hopefully you've had a chance or seen Teams in action. But we're going to talk about what functionality is available, or really what I'm talking about when it comes to folders versus channels. So you notice in my strategy and advisory services team, I have all of the channels that I've separated my information. So I can have chats and conversations inside of each of these channels, and I can separate the information so that it's very focused to the people that are working with me on my team. If I come down here to this other, I've created a team called Strategy with Folders that only has a general channel. And when I look at the file structure, you notice that this sort of mirrors the information that's also in my channels. So there are a couple of things you want to pay attention to. First one is there are a couple of features that actually don't work to put files into the folders if you do it this way. But the one thing that I want to stress is, if you've been around SharePoint for a while, you know that we used to have this 256 character limit. And if you know the infrastructure behind Teams, you know that it is SharePoint. Well, Microsoft's done a really great job of expanding that. So now our limit is 400 characters. But as you start to build out folder structure, and again, I'm going to say the folder structure inside of here, your natural instinct is to build your folder structure like you would in a file share. And so you wouldn't just necessarily have one level file structure. Many times people are looking to migrate in multiple layers of file shares and multiple layers of folders. And so just be careful and resist that urge. Think about when I might need to turn a folder into a channel and when it might be most beneficial. I'm going to show you a little bit later when we start working through how that doesn't work when you're uploading a file, when you're attaching a file, where that goes and how that doesn't quite match your intention for this. But remember that as I grow a file structure, my URL on the back end is still a limitation. So if you have a very deep structure here in your folders, you're going to reach that limitation. Be careful with that. You get some additional functionality too with channels that allow you to more focus the content and the conversations and everything else. In this scenario, if I use general and I'm having a conversation with 20 people on my team, there is absolutely a possibility that things could get lost and people could get confused and not actually get to the information that they want to, because you're having all of the conversation here, or all the posts are available here. If I break it down, I'm only seeing the content that is relevant to me in the subject matter or the topic that I'm looking to do. We're going to take a look at this general channel, and we're going to take a look at my teams, and we're going to look at files. And the first thing I'm going to show you is how we get files into teams. There are many ways to do that. So I'm looking at the teams folder, and I'm going to click on files. That's going to show me some files that are available to me. If I open up my desktop and I grab my Explorer and I copy, I click and drag, I can actually upload one item, and you notice in just a second it'll flip and it shows me that that file is now available to me. So I can click and drag very easily. I can grab a few. There are some limitations, I think like 10 at a time to actually drag in. If you're uploading, it's one at a time. But that's an easy way to move files from your desktop or another file share into Teams. I can use the upload button. So if I upload, I can do the exact same thing, and I can click to upload an item into Teams that way. I can also create a new folder, again, resist that urge, or I can create a new Word document, Excel, PowerPoint. I'm not going to actually show you that. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but I can create a blank document from here and make it appear inside of my Teams files environment. The one thing that I want to talk through now, and we're going to talk about adding files through posts, and that's the conversation here. But you notice we talked previously, and it's pretty clear Microsoft is doing a good job that a lot of things are automatically added as activities that are happening, so that you know when people are added, when people are removed, when activity is happening. But you notice I just uploaded that file, I clicked and dragged a file, but it didn't actually show me that there was activity in my files. Why might that be an issue? I could upload a ton of files and make them available in the Files tab, but nobody on my team knows that they're there. And so it's important to know, and a little trick to know how you can do that. But we're going to talk about attaching a file inside of a post. I'm going to click on Attach, and you notice that I have a couple of options, different than in the Files tab. So I can upload from my computer, I can grab it from my OneDrive, my personal OneDrive, or I can browse to other teams and channels, find files there, and pull them in. And then recent will show me the recent things that I've been working on. Each one of these, I want to make sure that I say this, each one of these items doesn't move files. It only copies it from the current location and puts it into the location that you're uploading it to. So if I'm going to upload from my computer, I'm going to click on this file here and click Open. And you notice this green bar across the bottom. Once it has completed, then the green bar will go away. I can start a new conversation around here. I can do a couple of things. So in the back end, we've created a couple of tags. And if you don't know what tags are, go look those up, because they're actually a really cool new feature. And it gives you the ability to make identifiers for people that are in your team and allow you to be able to very specifically call out or mention groups of people. So you no longer have to list 10 people. If you have a group of people that you always are communicating with, you create a tag for that, and then you add that here. So we've got one here, and that is for marketing. There we go. And you notice it says two people have this tag. And then I'm going to click the send button, and it's going to put that file into my post. It also, if I click back over here to files, you'll notice that that file has also been uploaded to the Files tab. It's not in two places. I know that's probably a little confusing. It's not in two places. It's just referenced in the post. But by virtue of adding it through the post, I do a couple of things. I'm able to communicate with the people that I'm working with, that the file is there and available for them to go work on, or whatever other instructions I might give them. And it also then adds it to the files. So I'm accomplishing two things instead of just leaving it in the files for people to discover. Makes it a lot easier, and then people can click on it and it goes directly into the file itself to be able to use it. So we're going to talk about co-authoring, because co-authoring is a really big deal here. When we look at files, I'm actually going to be joined here by my colleague, Bo Butcher, and I'm going to actually click into this file. And as I click in it, you'll notice it's opening inside of the context of Teams. And as the file opens, I can also see that Bo Butcher has joined me inside of the file. The other thing that I see here is that he is actually, this is the location in the file that he has is working on. But I'm going to scroll down, and we're going to take a look here, and I'm going to, at the same time as him, I'm actually going to start adding information. And you notice Bo all of a sudden has popped up here. And he's typing, and as he's typing, the real-time edits that he's making are being added to my window. So I can see not only where he is, but I'm getting his updates live as they're happening. The other thing that's happening behind the scenes is as I'm making my changes, you notice information bullet here, I made that change. It actually is saving at the same time. Bo is making his changes, and as he's saving, it's making another version. So when we talk about version history, there are many versions that happen. When you're working in co-authoring, there are many times that that file is being saved, because we want to be able to take a look at the edits that are happening, and we want to be able to potentially go back to an earlier version, or at least just see the information that was added and when and who might have done it, should I not actually be in the file. So Bo and I can be working on the document together, and when we're finished, great, that's, you know, we're finished doing what we needed to do. The other thing that I want to show you as long as I'm here is this conversations button. This conversations button, if I click to open this, you notice I have a start a conversation panel. It looks familiar, right? It looks like the conversations or the posts that we saw inside of the channel. The other thing is when we uploaded the files to this, the only one that showed up was the one that I uploaded through the post. And so I'm going to show you a little trick here. I can use @mention, and I can call Bo out. I can @mention Bo and say, thanks for your help. It adds that to the conversation. And then when I close and I'm done, my document is updated. But also if I go back to posts, I then see that conversation that I had inside the document is also now here in my post, so that people can come back through and actually reply to it. So somebody could provide comments here and send emojis and do all of the other fun things that you can do with the posts. So those are some really great ways that you can communicate with members of your team. So let's talk about the file storage and where files are stored within Teams, because we're going to switch over here to chat in just a second and talk about some of the same capabilities that's in the chat functionality. But when we talk about file storage inside of Teams, we're talking about the SharePoint infrastructure that exists behind the Office 365 group that is tied to the team. And so as I'm working in my team, the folder structure is there, the files are saved there, and the information is always there. But if we come over and we look at chat, I'm having a conversation with Bo, and inside of my chat functionality, while he's uploaded a file here, and I can look at it inside files here, it looks very similar, right? This file is actually stored in his OneDrive. And by virtue of him sharing it with me inside of this chat panel, he's actually shared it from his OneDrive. But I could open this up and work on it with him inside of his OneDrive, and that's where I would be able to locate it. Remember, that's different than where we are within Teams. That's stored and maintained inside of the SharePoint environment that is part of that infrastructure. The other thing that I have inside of chat is the ability to have sharing my screen or a phone call, an audio call, or a video call. If I were to share my screen, so let's talk about this from just sort of what is collaboration and how can I work on a file and collaborate on files even if it's not co-authoring, because there are ways to do that and there are ways to be able to collaborate with teammates without actually that co-authoring functionality. So I could actually share my screen, and when I shared my screen with Bo, I could open this file and I could be sharing the screen while I'm actually making changes to it, and he's just making changes on his end if he wanted to really do co-authoring. The other thing I could do is I could actually have a phone call with him, and I could have the file open, and I could then share with him my desktop so that we could do it. And I'm going to actually demonstrate that here. So I'm going to, I'm actually going to do a video call with him. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my desktop. And remember, we've talked about this in a couple of videos before, that screen and the window are a little bit different. So if you're on a pretty low bandwidth or something's going on with bandwidth, choose window over desktop. I'm going to choose window. I'm going to share my window with him. I'm going to switch back to my chat, and we can be having a conversation, video or not. I could click on this document to open it. It's going to open it in the context of Teams. And because I'm sharing my desktop, he doesn't actually have to be in this file. We could be having a video conference, we could be having just a phone call, and I could be making changes to this document without him making a change on his end, just authoring or having the conversation in an audio or a video call. And so I'm really collaborating with Bo, but I'm not co-authoring with Bo at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and close. And we've now collaborated on the same file, but he hasn't actually done the typing, right? We've just had a conversation. We could not have a conversation at all, and I could open this file and do the exact same thing, and we could be co-authoring at the same time. So just remember, there are other ways to collaborate besides co-authoring on a file. There are, and the reason I say it that way is because there are a couple of things that are important to know. And one of them is I can check out files. I'm actually going to go back to Teams to show you this one. So those of us who have been around SharePoint for a long time know that check out and check in has been sort of this double-edged sword. On one hand, it's a great way for you to keep your document protected and keep the document from others to make changes to it. But then there's also this other side that many times there are people who leave the organization or leave things checked out and don't realize that they have the files checked out, and then it becomes overwhelming for people to actually check in files. Microsoft has done a really good job in addressing that when they introduced this feature. And so I'm going to click over to the Files tab, and I'm going to click on the ellipsis here, and I get this More link down at the bottom. When I get the More link, there's actually another option for Check Out. So I'm going to check that out. When I check that out, I get a red arrow that indicates that I have checked out the file. On the other end, when people actually see it, they see my name attached to it. They see JoAnna Battin has this file checked out. Now, the use case for this is I don't want anyone to be able to make edits to the document that I'm working on. I only want them to review. So let's walk through how that might work. I check out a file, and scientific discovery is not in my post, right? There's no way for me right now to show it here. So I'm going to click back to Files. I'm going to click on it to open it, and I'm going to click on the Conversations tab. Now, I'm the one who has it checked out, so I actually can make the edits. But if somebody was using this, they didn't have it checked out, they wouldn't be in edit mode at this point. All they could do was come in here and use the conversations. So that's pretty cool, right? I can restrict people to only leave comments about my file and only leave comments about what they want me to update. It's checked out. They can't make those changes. They can provide feedback, and then I can compile that feedback and then make the edits that I choose or don't choose to make. And then one last thing I wanted to show you that I think is important, and it sort of circles back to when do I create channel structure versus when do I create folder structure, right? And we talked about that limitation of the URL, that's a really important thing to take notice of. And having a very in-depth file structure is not the way of the future. Microsoft has given you the ability to create those channels, and it's really an older way of thinking. So consider that as you're going through. Let's think about limiting the number of folders that you actually have inside of files. But I also want to show you, I'm here. If I look in files, I have a lot of folders in here. And remember, I said one of the really cool things is that I can actually have conversations about files. And if I wanted to, important for me to be able to notify my team that there's a file there or that I've uploaded a file, I'm going to click upload from my computer. I'm going to select a file. Went through this process. I'm importing that, right? It's moving it into the Files tab, and I'm going to click Send. It's now provided that link here on the landing page or on the post so that I can see that it's there, or my team can see that it's there. I could have mentioned my team or the tag, but let's take a look at what happened. You notice I wasn't given the option of which file to choose or folder to put it into. But if I click on files, you'll see that it's added to the root of the files. So adding folders and expecting to be able to use some of that additional functionality doesn't work. It's only going to add it into the root directory. So we have to think about that when you're working through and uploading files and really trying to work within teams. If I moved this, I can move it into one of these folders, but it's going to screw up the link on the post. And so the functionality that really makes teams exciting and really makes teams valuable to you is now suddenly gone because you have no folder structure. So what are the key takeaways from today? Just think about Teams as your virtual workspace, right? When things get back to some normalcy and you're working not just in your house, but you're working back in your office and collaborating with your team, just think about that as the way for you to connect and collaborate, store files, work real time with people. It should be a way to be more productive and really be engaged with your team. And the other thing is, it's important to remember where those files are stored. If I'm working in chat, that's my OneDrive being shared. I'm working with files inside of my OneDrive or whoever it is that I'm actually working with. And if I'm working inside of Teams, that's that Teams infrastructure we talked about. So just be careful when you're doing that. And also remember that when you upload a file from your desktop or from another team or from your OneDrive, it's not moving that file there, it's actually copying a file there. So if you're trying to move something out of your OneDrive to permanently place it inside of Teams, you want to go back and delete it from your OneDrive so that you're not confused about where that file actually lives or where the final version of that is. And then let's talk about ways to collaborate. Share your screen and talk through the changes when you're in a one-to-one meeting or on Teams or inside of a channel, right? You can edit the document alone and then use the chat functionality to let people know that you have made changes. That's a part of collaboration too. I can use Teams calling. We showed that, where I'm actually having a phone call or a video chat with somebody and be making changes in real time, be collaborating with that person without us actually co-authoring. And of course, co-authoring is a big deal, and those features and functionality, being able to see the versions and where the changes are being made and real-time updates is really a cool feature. And remember, use that conversations inside the document. I think it's a really great feature. And chat, actually, when you have chats inside of meetings and you're working through things on that, it actually adds it to that conversation panel as well. And check out files when you want to just elicit feedback and you don't want, or you want to limit the ability for people to be able to co-author with you. So that's it for today. I think we're going to go back to questions. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope that this was meaningful and you got a lot of really great information. Diane, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, JoAnna. That was really informative. I always get lots of great tips from you. So we're going to now begin answering questions we received during the presentation. So just a quick reminder, you can still submit any questions through the questions pane on your attendee control panel. So JoAnna, ready for the questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, so our first one is, excuse me, why do Word documents open up in edit mode? I just want people to read them, but not edit them.
Right, so we covered that a little bit in that checkout features and functionality, and Microsoft up until just recently, a couple of months ago, the checkout feature wasn't available. And so you got into it read only, and that was the way to limit when you were actually making changes. But once they introduced the checkout feature, and once that functionality was in place, then they said, well, how do I keep people from being able to have that double click in order to be able to edit? Because to be honest, in some cases, when you went to go read only, all you really wanted to do was edit it, and you had to click a couple of buttons. So it eliminates that need. If you want to restrict it, put checkout so that people can't actually edit it, and that'll allow you to have more control over that feature or more control over that ability. Hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, I think so. Next question. Can you turn off the new folder option?
That's a really good question. I would say, here's my advice. Anything that is there by default, there are probably ways that you can do that. I would say, even if you can, should you? Because Microsoft is constantly updating the application, and you don't want to do anything that's actually going to cause issues. And so if the functionality is there, my approach to everything is, even the pieces where people might get caught up. In one of our future webinars, we're going to talk about administration. There are not ways to turn those things off, or it's a limited way to turn them off. But you talk to people about how those can impact what you're doing, and then you help them not to make those decisions. That's one of them. That's why we talk about it. That's why I spent a lot of time today talking about folders, because you don't get the functionality. But any of those features that are there, I would say leave them, because we never know what Microsoft is going to do on the back end.
Okay, that makes sense. Here's another question, which I think a lot of us actually have. Can we create metadata or columns to allow for grouping and filtering of files?
Yes. And maybe that's a good topic to actually add to a future webinar that we do.
Mm-hmm.
I would say some of that is still limited use. And I think that that question usually comes from people who have been using SharePoint for a long time, right?
Yep.
You're used to doing metadata, you're used to being able to create content types and apply those. In this case, I like to talk to people about the reason for having metadata both in the other versions of SharePoint or in SharePoint in general is for you to control the vast amount of information that was in those particular areas. If you do and create and set up your teams and your channel structure, many times the need for additional metadata is eliminated. Just because you've thought about the metadata or the reasons why you're trying to separate information or can't find it ahead of time, and that's how your team is set up. Adding metadata within teams, to me, is a little counterintuitive. That's my opinion, but I've also been around SharePoint for a long time, and know that there is an urge and a need. But if you look at teams as collaboration, not as a consumption location, which is what the true SharePoint environment should be, that's really where you need to be focused with metadata if you need it.
Okay, that makes sense. So another question is, how do we collaborate on a file with someone who's not part of a team? There may be times when I want input from someone who's not part of my departmental team.
All right, so that's a kind of a loaded question, but I love it because it's something that I definitely get asked a lot. That also means that the person who asked that question understands and knows that Teams is limited to the people who are actually able to get access to it, right? So you have to grant permission for somebody to join your team. And then your files exist there, and there's a purpose. You've limited that ability for people to get there. There are a couple of ways to do that, and we can talk about that in a second, but I want to urge you against sharing out of your file structure. So the capability is there for you to share a link with somebody who's not a member of your team and give them the ability to take a look at that file. It's there, but I really think if you're looking at your team as a secure location, that bubble I've referred to before, that you shouldn't go there. And I think that's also an example from the last question where something is there, you have to speak to it and teach people that it's there, and understand what the ramifications are. The functionality is there, but I would absolutely resist the urge to use it. There are other ways. You could share it through your OneDrive, or share it through a chat, and you're given the ability then to attach a file in your OneDrive from your team into your chat session, which ultimately moves that to your OneDrive. That is an option as well. You could manually move it if you wanted to too. There are a lot of decision points in doing that, and I'll just go back to say I would resist the urge that is natural to share it from the file structure.
Okay.
Or add a team, or add another team, or use another team that they actually do have and copy it there.
Right. So here's almost a flip side of that question. So flip side of that first question. So here's the next one. We have multiple teams set up based on departments. We have staff that want to work with different departments and share files. What's the best way to set this up? A new team with multiple people from different departments, or a SharePoint folder with different permissions?
Back to the just because you should doesn't mean you should. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. That I would absolutely resist doing that second option. Look, let's talk about the very first thing that most people do, and you're highlighting, this question is highlighting the fact that when you're really trying to get quickly into teams, the urge is to do it by department. And that's a great thing, because your department, you're actually collaborating and sharing and working with information and resources together. But there are absolutely many times when you will have cross-departmental teams or groups of people who need to collaborate. And it's completely appropriate to set up a new team if you can, and there's a purpose for it. And all of the people, again, I think one of the go back and watch one of the last couple of webinars that we've done. We talked about what the rules were for setting up a team, right? Make sure that everybody who gets access to a team gets access to everything inside of it. Private channels is another thing. You probably, I would say that's not a solution for that either. But take a look at your team structure. There's probably a purpose and a reason for you working together. And so why not create that as a team? Why not create that collaboration environment for you as a group of people who need to work together? Sometimes in those scenarios, channel structure is more important than anything, because then those people who are cross-departmental only need to focus on the areas of that team that they need to pay attention to. They can pin the channels to the top of teams, that kind of thing.
Okay, that makes sense. I definitely know from experience that once you start using Teams, you find that it might not be the way you thought it was going to work. So the great part I found about Teams is that it's fluid. You know, you can adjust and move to really discover how your team works together.
Yeah, again, focusing on those things, and it's a great point, Diane, that the way that you set it up initially, or you think about it as you start to work through it, doesn't necessarily always work the way you expect. It's why I ask people to wait on any kind of automation or workflow, get the team structure set up the way that they need to first before they automate anything, because they'll always be circling back around to resolve that. But that actually brings up another point that I think is important. If it's okay, I'm going to say one last thing about that. There is one thing really that you can't change, and that is the name that you call the team from the very beginning is the Office 365 group and the SharePoint URL. So if you create a team called Strategy, and you go through and you set up all your channel structure, and you've added everything, and then you decide that you want to broaden the scope of that team, and so you change the name of the team on the front end. The display name is changed, but all the supporting infrastructure and everything around that is always the original name that you called it. It's the only gotcha there in terms of being able to be fluid and move things around.
Yep, Makes sense. Okay, so last question. Is it possible to attach a file that resides in Teams to an email?
I'm hesitating here because I'm trying to understand where that question is coming from. Because is it coming from, are you trying to attach the message the inside of Outlook? If you're trying to attach it inside of Outlook, that there's some limitations there, and that's actually a little clunky. The Office 365 groups, when Microsoft went to change the ability for people actually to create groups, because we are moving towards a more team structure, that information, or the ability to do that, was there, and sometimes it's there. If you've used it, sometimes your teams will show up and sometimes they won't. It's not reliable. I do know that the integration of email and calendaring and tasks, in fact, if you saw one of the latest updates, Planner is having a huge modification over the summer. And so all of the emailing capabilities and planning and tasks that are associated typically with Outlook and inside of Teams are changing. So even if it's not available to you right now, even if you can't find the group or the place to locate it, I assume that will be coming. The other thing is that you can always send an email, or you can always grab the link and add it to an email if you wanted to as well.
Yeah, that's what I usually do. And I just so that they'll have access to it right away. So
Exactly.
that was great, JoAnna. So that's the end of our questions. So thank you, JoAnna, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.